question if God is at work in my life. All I have to do is see where I'm resisting what is. That is where God is at work.
Welcome to the Live True podcast. I'm David Lovelace.
And I'm Carone Lovelace, and this is the podcast dedicated to true spiritual living.
Join us for a candid conversation around personal spiritual secrets that are revolutionizing the way we see ourselves, the way we love and relate to others, and enable us to do our work with even more fruitfulness and fulfillment. We're sharing some of our successes and failures, as well as doing interviews and having insights from some of the best spiritual leaders, psychologists, and wisdom teachers. We're here to help you live, love, and lead from the source of your true identity.
Today we'll be talking about the one argument we can never win.
That should be interesting. So we're going to start this with an argument, huh?
Well, of sorts.
Of sorts. Okay. Well, before we get to that, do you have any fantasy football updates you want to give us?
Oh, yes. I am.
You're still number one.
Still number one. Still number one.
But it's very unfortunate. Tony Romo, our man.
Cowboys.
He's out for most of the season for the Dallas Cowboys, and I know that's just crushed God's heart.
Or at least some people in Dallas.
Yes, I know.
And a few in Orlando.
Yeah, but rest of our audience, they could care less.
Yeah, probably not.
They could care less.
Yeah.
Hey, we got a new G baby coming up a couple of weeks from now.
A couple more weeks. We get to have grandbaby number 8. It's going to be Judah Archer Lovelace.
Judah.
No,
and where's that name Judah come from?
Judah comes from the Bible.
Yes. And
what?
Doesn't it come from a movie too? Isn't that why Joe?
No, it's not from that. No, it's not about Ben-Hur.
Okay.
Oh my goodness.
So it's all Bible. It's not movie at all.
It's I don't know exactly how it comes about, but
okay. All right, we'll get more verification later. Hey, listen, if you missed last week's opening episode, we talked in depth about who we are and our story and a mixture of heaven and hell that's been experiencing all of it, and then how it relates to this specific weekly podcast that we're now providing. If you missed that, you can find it in iTunes, or else you can find it on our website. So we just also want to mention today, this podcast is brought to you by youlivetrue.com, youlivetrue.com. It's an online site that's dedicated to help you live, love, and lead from the source of your true identity. You can find out more at youlivetrue.com. All right, so let's get right into this episode today, my dear. The one argument we can never win.
Well, what we've discovered is that there is actually one argument that will sabotage our life and our relationships every single time. And we'll tell you what that is, and then we'll give you just a few of the ways that it manifests itself. So the only time we suffer is when we believe a thought about ourselves or someone else that argues with what is.
So it can be someone or something. It can be a circumstance or a relationship, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. So if you want reality to be different than it is, you might as well try to teach a squirrel how to bark. Whenever you think in terms of the categories of should or should not, these thoughts are just ways of wanting reality to be different than what it is. What you think shouldn't have happened should have happened. It should have happened because it did happen. And no thinking on your part or my part can change that. Now, that doesn't mean that you've got to condone it. You've got to approve of whatever it might be that's transpiring. It just means that you learn to see things without resistance. It's that resistance that creates that argument. We're working hard ourselves on being lovers of what is. You know why? Because it hurts whenever we argue with reality. And that always leads to tension and frustration, great stress in our lives. But when we stop opposing reality, action all of a sudden becomes simple, fluid, and fearless within us.
We're going to start out easy on you today. We're going to take a couple of the easier ways that we deal with what is and how we actually fight it. there are greater and more significant ways, but we want to start easy. So we're going to start with something simple like irritations. So what do you know about irritations? What do you think about irritations? What do you know about me and irritations?
What do you mean by that? As in, what are your what are the things that irritate you?
Yeah, what things you think irritate me?
Ooh, oh, nothing, honey.
No, it's not true. Okay.
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind of what irritates you that I notice is whenever any of your fantasy football players aren't doing well.
Okay,
that
well,
irritates you.
I'm
But let's
not-
quickly move on.
Yeah, I'm not super worried about them, but
Traffic. I've noticed traffic really irritates you if lights aren't cooperating, if cars in front of you are not moving at the approximately 83 miles an hour you like to drive,
do you think that's it?
something like that.
You've seen that be an irritation to me.
I've seen that be an irritation to you. I don't know if I've ever irritated you, have I?
At least once or twice.
How about you? What are some of the things you've seen irritate me?
Technology.
That's right.
I've seen you get just a bit you could have maybe possibly thrown a few things here or there just preparing for podcast world. We are doing this.
This is a couple of months ago. I was spitting mad.
Yeah,
actually.
it's kind of fun project we're doing here in podcast world, and we're doing this kind of on our own. And so we have really never been known to be super technical in our ability to put things together. But so far,
Well,
so good.
I can make my way around.
Yeah, so far so good.
Yeah, so far so good.
But you did show irritation
Yeah.
at a number of points when A was not connecting to B like it should.
Yes.
So
Yes. I did not feel like the technology gods were cooperating with me.
no, but it was fun watching you throw things across the room.
But I didn't throw them at you.
No, not at me.
Okay, let's clarify that. What else have you seen
I've
that
seen
irritates me?
dealing with bank officials.
Oh yeah, like yesterday. Yeah,
Would you like to tell us about that?
not particularly.
No.
But yeah, we one of our bank cards got compromised, and so the bank calls me and says, "Can you verify this particular transaction that went through a couple of weeks ago in another part of the country?" I went, "I don't know anything about that transaction." So they said, "Okay, well, your card's been compromised. We're gonna have to send you another one." So 5-7 days later, this new one shows up, and you've all had this experience before where you've got to activate the card. So, right, you got to call the number on your card. And so I called the number at the end of the workday yesterday and to reactivate this card. And so they asked for the last 4 numbers of my social security number. I entered those and it said that's invalid. So I entered them again. The computer then said it was still invalid. Then it asked me for my federal tax ID for this account. And I entered that, and it said invalid.
Are you beginning to feel a little bit insignificant at this point?
Yeah, I was.
You're not. You don't exist.
Yeah,
and you don't have a.
Yeah, and I was irritated because I somehow imagined that I should have complete control of the situation, and it was not cooperating with my agenda. I had better things to do. Then eventually, it kicked me over to a live operator. And so she asked for a completely different piece of information than what the computer had asked me. I had to repeat that to her several times. And then as I'm asking her questions, she cuts me off and sends me back over to a computer. At that point,
Yeah.
I was...
At that point, you closed the door. I noticed you closed the door. Is that because you don't want me to hear what you're going to say to them?
I was
Or-
about to utter a prayer to high heaven.
I see.
And
You needed privacy
you
for
don't
that.
need, the Bible says when you pray, go into your closet.
Okay, I got you.
So
Yeah.
I was trying to spare you from my closet experience.
Well, anyway.
Okay.
Speaking of getting activated.
Yeah, all those are true confessions.
Yeah.
right?
Speaking of being activated, someone or something pushes my buttons and I really show myself, as my granny used to say. She used to say, and it's kind of an interesting phrase. They show themselves. That's a southern phrase, I guess. I don't know if they say it up north but back in the day, my
We
granny.
never set in Oklahoma.
Well, okay, so it's not Southwestern. But she used to say she really showed herself, or you really showed yourself, or whatever. And I think it's really interesting phrase because when we do react or act out, we are showing a part of our false self, not our true self necessarily. If we're acting out in a negative way or an irritating way or an activated way.
But how's it false when it's something we do feel it?
Absolutely.
So how's that false?
That's very real, what we feel, but it's not coming from our true source of who we are in God and who God has made us to be.
Right.
And it's a contrived, a constructed way that we have learned to live in the world and react and interact with people that we think keeps us safe. But in reality, eventually, it doesn't serve us really well. At first it does, and we'll talk some more about that in another podcast. But for today, we really want to take a look at how irritations really do rise to the surface and show us how we are not accepting what is. I have regularly done that where I have been irritated. Like, for instance, there was a time, a little while back, we were sitting in the car ready to go somewhere. David was driving. I was in the passenger seat, and I see that he needs to send a text. And so he starts texting what I would consider to be a very, very long text. I wait and I wait and I wait a good 20 seconds before I say, oh, wow, that's a really long text you got going on there. Wouldn't it be better to just leave the guy a voicemail? That would save a ton of time. I mean, seriously, aren't your fingers, really hurting by now? So David just keeps texting. He pretends to be deaf. He's committed to this text. There's no turning back. There's nowhere special that we really need to be, though. But I'm feeling increasing agitation, irritation. I'm ready to go now. I somehow forget the 105,819 times David has waited in the car for me while I change outfits no less than 3 times.
Do you think that's a fair estimation? 105,000 times I've waited.
At least close.
I think it's a little more than that.
Of course you do. Of course you do. But anyway, I find that his text of biblical proportions is totally unnecessary. So suddenly I become the paragon of informational efficiency. Wouldn't it be better if you just leave him a voicemail? Why am I saying this? Because the delay I'm experiencing is not about me. I am feeling inconvenienced. I am somehow more important than whatever David has going on at the time. Now, I'm not consciously thinking about this, of course. I'm a much better person than that. But somewhere in the middle of this 2-minute top scenario, I slowly become aware that something inside me will feel better if I get my way. If I can alter this tiny situation a little bit more to my liking, if I can take control. Oh, wait. If I'm in control, then God cannot be. So why does it feel important that I get my way on this?
That statement you just made. If I'm in control, then God cannot be. I've wrestled with that throughout the course of my life. I want God to be in control. Oh, hang on. If he's not cooperating with me as I perceive reality is in that moment, then I want to seize control of it. We came across a quote not too long ago that, just really seized our attention around this. And Carl Jung said this one time. He said, everything that irritates us about ourselves can lead us to an understanding of ourselves.
No, you want to say that different.
All right. Everything that irritates us
about others
can lead us to an understanding of ourselves.
Yeah.
That's right. I just wanted to see if you would catch that.
I was paying attention.
All right.
Yeah.
There you go. So in that, this is a very, very challenging statement. He's saying anytime there's an agitation, an irritation that we have with other people or with other things, what that's really intended to do is to lead us down a very important road and path so we can better understand ourselves. Gosh, I don't like that. I'd rather hang the blame on someone else than to turn it back toward myself.
Yeah.
So let's think about this. What's eating us when we get so aggravated? For example, if you're stuck with an overly happy cashier that's making frivolous small talk about a recent vacation, with each of the 10 people that are standing in front of you, either at the dollar store, at Target, or Trader Joe's, right? I mean, what happens when you get to the front of the line? I mean, I have to confess, I profile slow cashiers.
I totally do.
Yeah, we both do. We both we don't even say anything to each other. We quickly scan the lines, scan the crowds, and we scan the cashiers. And we
You can
immediately
just look at them and tell if they're fast or slow.
That's right. We make a quick assessment right there.
Yeah.
Have you ever been wrong?
Maybe a few times, but I've been right more than I've been wrong, I think.
Okay, yeah.
Which is about right in life, too.
Yes,
I've been
it is.
right more than wrong.
Okay, yeah.
Don't you think? Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, you know, let's take that offline. Talk about that. So, but anyway, let's say you've got 10 people in front of you. This overly happy cashier, she's making the frivolous small talk with them, and you know, by the time I get up to the front of the line, what I notice about me is I'm feeling irritated. I'm feeling agitated, and I tend to initially think that the problem is an external problem. It's all about her and what she should have been doing differently or shouldn't have been doing. And instead, it's trying to reflect back an understanding of myself. In that moment, I felt like that my desire and my agenda to get out of there perhaps 47 seconds later or 2 minutes later was far more important than her being relational, her being loving with other people, because my life's more important.
You were in a hurry. You had things to do.
I had things to do, right. And so that's an example of where I get irritated, but if I'm really being reflective in the way that God wants me to live every day, gosh, I have an open invitation right there in that moment. Dang, I don't even have to go to church.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I got a transformational opportunity and moment right there. Gosh, I don't even have to open up my Bible.
Right.
It's there staring me in the face.
Okay, so let me just make a point here that I think I'm still learning a lot about, and that's that when we see we're reacting or we're irritated or we're agitated, that's actually kind of like an alarm bell. That's kind of like a wake up alarm, maybe, that we use when we get up in the morning.
Yep.
It's supposed to wake us up. Our agitation, our irritation, our consternation with anything that's going on that's not going our way, and we're not being able to accept with what is happening at the moment, really is to be an alarm. It could be an alarm if we learn to become aware and to watch ourselves as these feelings are coming up in us. Don't you think?
Yeah, what you're describing sounds a heck of a lot like the way God's constructed us physically. So when there's something wrong in some part of our physical body, we start experiencing some level of stress, tension, pain, and it's trying to alert us to something even deeper, right? Is that what you're saying?
Like you feel it in your body, some stress.
Exactly.
And that tells you something else is going on.
Yeah.
Which is another argument with what is actually
exactly.
stress is.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So when we learn to observe our reactivity to a person or situation, really what we get is a front row seat to a defining moment in our own spiritual transformation. A few years ago, I remember, I don't know how this happened, but, the phrase came to me one day that, because we were having lots of conversations around discipleship, what it meant to follow Jesus, all that in our everyday lives. And I remember this thing just kind of came to me that every morning when we wake up, we have a customized discipleship curriculum waiting for us.
Right.
And it's called life.
Yeah.
And it's not a fill-in-the-blank thing. It's an experiential thing.
Yes.
And throughout the course of everyday reality, whatever it might be, there's going to be an invitation there in the midst of that reality for further change and transformation that I do want to have and I don't want to have. I do want to go there, but I want to choose my own path. I think that's another reason why I wrestle with reality very often.
Yeah.
But that actually ends up being the exact place where God is at work in us.
Yes.
Right there.
Yes.
just simply observing our reactivity to a circumstance or to a person or to a relationship. See, obviously, God knows what we're made of. And when he sees our flawed responses, I mean, we're surprised that, he doesn't condemn us as we might condemn ourselves. Instead, what we have found to be true is that God just stands compassionately alongside of us, whether we're going through, fully playing out the comedies of our life or the tragedies of our life. He really is seeking to show us how shame, fear, or guilt that the enemy has brought in, it's illegally taken root in our lives. And he's offering a compassionate way out. I got to admit, it's taken me most of my life just to begin to understand this and experience this. Because in the past, whenever I've had a flawed response to anything, I immediately heap condemnation on myself because, gosh, this is painful to admit. I think part of that is just I'm projecting myself out onto God, that he is condemning me for my flawed response, as if he's disappointed in me,
right.
As if I've surprised him beyond what he already knew I was going to do, which is not possible. And instead, we've both been coming to see how God holds all the comedies, all the tragedies, all the failures, all the betrayals, all the pain points. He holds it all compassionately together, and he wants to teach us how to experience ourselves and others in that same way. Do you concur?
I do. And there's another example of not accepting or arguing with what is, and that's resistance. Some years ago, I was working with a person who always rubbed me the wrong way. I don't know if any of you have ever experienced that. But
Are you talking about me?
No, not you. Somebody else. And I felt tense around them. Even though I could see them really trying to make an effort to be nice, something about their approach seemed disingenuous. And I always felt an unspoken power struggle between us, whether we were discussing an agenda for a meeting or how we were going to, pull off an event. And intuitively, I just did not trust this person, and I resisted them. I just felt a resistance in me toward them. And it was a mutual resistance that caused almost every project that we worked on together to seem stressful. Sadly, the person moved on before we could fully get on the same page.
But what you're saying, what I hear you saying, is you're recognizing now even more what that resistance was and the invitation of it for you.
Yeah, I was resisting what is in that person.
Yeah.
Instead of recognizing that actually what God was giving me the opportunity to do was to accept that person, not to resist them, because they do, they were affecting me in a way that rubbed me the wrong way, which means it was working against some of the things in my own personality that, are just reactive to somebody like that.
So do you think your resistance had anything to do with what irritated you about them was actually the very thing that irritated you about you?
I don't know. I understand that can be true, that we often cannot see something about ourselves. And so we project that on another person. That's a very mysterious, mystical thing, but it's apparently very true.
Yeah.
In that situation, I think there probably was something about that person that was similar to something I had in me that I didn't like and I didn't want to see about me.
Yeah.
What I most remember was just feeling some sort of kind of power struggle. And, and so definitely I could say there was probably some control in me I was trying to have that this other person wasn't allowing me to fully experience. And so I was pushing against what is in that situation. Now, I think that happens to us often in all different kinds of situations and relationships. And, to be able to recognize there is a resistance in me. What does that mean? Where is that coming from? What is that about?
What am I arguing with?
What am I arguing with?
Yeah, yeah. So there are, when we think about resistance as another manifestation of arguing with what is, I mean, we can think about the numerous synonyms that can perhaps offer a couple other angles of understanding. It's whenever we're fighting what is, whenever there's opposition in us, whenever there's contention, whenever there's literally a counteraction to the action that we are experiencing. Whenever there's a defiance within us, there's a resistance going on. Whenever we feel a struggle or refusal, or very often I know for me, whenever I feel resistance, very often I react rather than I responding. I react from my conditioned identity as opposed to responding and being receptive. Which I think is only possible when I'm learning to discover and live from the truest part of who God's made me to be. So I've noticed for myself that I get resistant in situations where I feel threatened, where I feel fearful, where I feel uncared for, where I feel hurt. You've seen me do that, where I've gotten resistant, where I've just felt hurt.
Yeah.
I can think back many times in my life where I got resistant situations where I felt unrecognized. I can think of several specific situations when someone was trying to power up on me, and I could feel that. And I could feel that resistance rise in me, like I needed to take on the role of God and take care of them right there in that situation. And also I felt, resistant in situations whenever someone was resisting me. It's like I needed to change that, about them.
Yeah. Well, Stephen Pressfield says criticism is a form of resistance too. He says if you find yourself criticizing others, you're probably doing it out of resistance. He says sometimes when we see others beginning to live out of their authentic selves even, it drives us crazy, and we resist them if we have not lived out of our authentic selves. When we feel settled inside, knowing we are whole, enough, and thoroughly loved, we can lay down our struggle for power, for control, and our resistant stance to anything or anyone that appears to come against us.
Can you say all that again? That's just really significant.
Yeah, when we feel settled inside, knowing we are whole, enough, and thoroughly loved, we can lay down our struggle for power, control, and resist our resistant stance to anything or anyone that seems like it's coming against us.
In the form of reality.
Yeah. Whatever's happening at that moment.
Yeah.
Now, we want to make sure that you understand it does not apply when someone is attempting to physically harm you.
Yep.
That's not what we're saying here. But we can really say that most of the time that's not going to be happening for most of us.
Yep.
Most of the time, the argument with what is that we're going to be having is an argument with a person or a circumstance or a situation that we just don't want. We don't want to be a part of. We don't want it to happen. We don't want it to be coming our way. We're anxious about it. We're resistant to it or to them. So there's a scripture that I thought of the other day in Matthew 5 that I thought this is kind of what maybe Jesus might have been getting at, a part of what he might have been getting at when he said, "And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles." Now, if you hear what I hear in that is I hear there's a flow coming. Jesus is saying, don't resist when someone asks of you something you don't want to give, or when someone asks you to do something you don't want to do. And that could be anything, when really reality asks you to do something you don't want to do. But to go with them 2 miles, in other words, don't resist, go with the situation, move with it instead of against it.
Yeah, that's really good. I'm just realizing, that's from Matthew 5:40, that I've never seen anyone hold a placard up in a football game that says Matthew 5:40 on it.
Oh,
It's always John 3:16.
Yeah, that's true.
Right?
Right.
And there's got to be a reason why we've memorized John 3:16, but
Mm-hmm.
out of all the verses we've memorized, we've never memorized Matthew 5:40.
Yeah.
You know. So, yeah, that's really good.
I think
really
that
good,
the spiritual message in that is don't resist what's happening in the moment.
Yeah.
Stop resisting it.
Oh, that's hard.
Rest in it.
Yeah.
Let it be. Let it happen.
Yeah.
Let it come. And trust that God is with you in it to help you by bringing you peace, by bringing you joy, by being the love that you need to endure or to take any situation that's coming your way.
But doesn't that take, enormous amounts of trust where you actually believe that God is in control, that God is benevolent, He's generous beyond description. Everything is loving, even though everything doesn't feel loving in the moment.
Yeah, I would say it takes trust, but I don't know how big a trust it requires. I think it really does take our being able to practice the presence of God in stillness and silence.
Yep.
Even 5 or 10 minutes a day is enough to be able to recognize who He is inside us, not out there, but in here.
Yeah. So for all of us today, let's think about even how there might be resistance in our lives that is really sabotaging our relationships. Like for me, I'm learning to see myself in the process of a negative encounter, to become aware of what's happening inside me while a situation like resistance is unfolding. It's kind of like spying on myself. I'm the James Bond of myself. I'm the Jason Bourne of myself, detaching myself just enough from what I'm saying or feeling to try to look beneath the words and the feelings so I can get to the root of it. And, honestly, for me, 99% of the time, it's my ego or my false self that's struggling to fight a war that really has already been won. As I look back, just over the course of the last couple of years, there have been so many things that have come my way that I have not welcomed at all. Right. I mean, they were like the last things in the world I wanted. And I felt great resistance arising within me, but it's been that very thing that has invited me into all kinds of ongoing transformation that's ended up being very life-giving to me.
Yes, and to me as well.
Yeah. So I think one of the most significant things we have seen together here in the recent part of our journey is whenever we argue with what is, we're going to lose 100% of the time. So what does it mean for us to, again, not necessarily approve of what's happening, condone what's happening, put our good housekeeping seal of approval on it, but going, it goes back to the classic phrase, doesn't it, that so many people use these days? It is what it is.
It is what it is.
Well, if it is what it is, then quit arguing with it, quit resisting it. But instead of just doing that from trying to modify or manage your behavior, don't resist this. Instead, turn around and go, David, what is this resistance? What is this sense of reality inviting you to see about yourself?
Yeah. What if I could hear somebody maybe thinking, well, what about, goals? Like, sometimes you feel a resistance to accomplish a goal in life or to, see some breakthrough, some barrier in your, work world or something like that. How is that different, or is that different from accepting what is? I mean, do we just sit around and just accept and go, la, 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 this is how life is, oh, well? Or I don't think that's the attitude.
No, and we certainly don't see that in Scripture. We clearly don't see it in the life of Jesus. We're supposed to show up each day in every circumstance, every relationship of our life with the best of who we are and what the way we've been designed and wired, and then we encounter real life, reality, and from that, I think there are opportunities to see things. The Scripture seems to indicate that that's where we have these grand invitations for transformation within us. But it doesn't mean that we have to help me out here.
Well, just stop being productive. For instance, use that as an example. You know, you have to sometimes overcome certain circumstances. You don't just sit still and wait for something to happen. Even if you feel a resistance to something. But at the same time, you want to go, where is that resistance coming from? Is it coming from a place of what versus coming from a negative place of must do, must have, must accomplish? What's the difference?
So, okay, all right, that's great. So that kind of activates my memory around one of the things you mentioned a while ago. And, you know, a few months ago when I was first, you know, getting this podcast equipment, setting it up, and there were multiple points of frustration there. And I got irritated. I was resisting the fact this isn't working the way it's supposed to be working. And I reacted part of the time to that. Now, again, I wasn't supposed to just accept the fact, well, this isn't working. These mics aren't working with the mixer. The mixer isn't working with a digital recorder. It's not pouring into the computer the way it's supposed to be. And so when I was in my right mind, sometimes when I was in my right mind and when I was sane, I would step back. And I didn't go, well, I guess that's just the way it is. But I did step back. I would take a deep breath, and I would try to move out of my reactive self into my receptive self.
That's good.
And go, all right, so what's happening in me right now? What's this equipment trying to show me right now that I cannot read about in the instruction manual? And it showed me the ongoing issues of I demand every day that life be the way that I think that it should be. And when it doesn't, I react to that. As opposed to when it doesn't respond the way I want it to. What does it mean for me to be receptive to either God wants me to change my course of action or go about it in a different way, or to see something further within me. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, listen to this phrase. This is something that I try to repeat to myself at different times when I'm just quiet and I'm getting still with God. Or that times I find myself getting agitated or irritated about something that's going on that I don't want to be happening. So listen to this phrase. In God, I am fully complete. At my core, it is all good. I have no territory to protect because nothing of true and lasting value can ever be taken away from me. The battle for me has been won. It is safe to lay down my weapons. I no longer argue with what is happening in the present moment.
Wow, that's really good.
I'll say it again.
Okay.
In God, I am fully complete. And that's true. At my core, it is all good. In that place in me where God resides, where God has created me in his image, it is all good. I have no territory there to protect because nothing of true and lasting value can ever be taken away from me. The battle for me has been won, so it's safe to lay down my weapons. I no longer argue with what is happening in the present moment.
So as you were saying that, I know this will be perhaps troubling for some. The verse that came to my mind is out of Psalm. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. this is the moment.
Yes.
This is the time. This is the season.
Even when it's a bad season.
Even when it's a bad season.
Or a bad moment. Like we're losing a loved one.
Yeah.
Or our marriage is crumbling or something's happened.
Yeah.
That's catastrophic,
Yeah.
unexpected.
Yeah.
How do we flow with what is there?
Yeah, well, we know that if we argue with it, we'll lose 100% of the time.
Right.
Because it's happened or it's happening right now. And we can't control the whole thing. We can clearly control our response to it and what we're choosing to do with it. But somehow, because we both happen to believe, because of the writings of Scripture and our own personal history and experience, that, all of life, you can't figure out, is this God or is this the enemy, right? I mean, some things are very obvious,
Right.
and other things you go, gosh, I don't know if God was in that or the enemy was. But at the end of the day, we believe that God is ultimately in control of everything.
And he's in everything, and he's at
exactly.
everything.
And then the promise has been that God causes everything to work together for good. No one else has that control, power, and authority. And I've just, as painful as that has been for me, I'm learning to trust that like never before.
Well, something that I actually like to say that just came to me one day when I needed it, I think, is this phrase: whatever comes, God comes with it.
Ooh, I like that.
Whatever comes, God comes with it.
Yeah.
And if we can just receive that and recognize that no matter what's happening, whether we like it or not, God is still there with it, with us in it. And that's really what the Spirit is here for, is to be with us in any moment, in every moment of our life, good, bad, ugly, indifferent, continuing to remind us of who we are and whose we are,
Yeah.
that we are fully complete already, and at our core, all is good.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, this quote, you created this quote, didn't you?
I think so.
We'll include this quote in the show notes on our website so that you can read it several times a day for yourself if it resonates with you. And we would encourage you basically find a way just to carry it around with you for 7 days and see if some of your resistance doesn't begin to fade into a much bigger reality that's really called the kingdom of God. So today we've been talking about the one argument that we can't win. So how can we win in all of this? How do we accept what is? I think, first of all, there's just got to be openness to us. There's got to be an openness within me that the way I have planned out every day and every part of my life is going to clash very often with reality and what is. So can there, first of all, be an openness within me that, you know what, someone else perhaps bigger, smarter, and far more loving than me is in charge of this whole thing, even the hard, difficult parts. So can I be open to something else needs to be going on or is going on, and it's an invitation for further transformation in great ways in me? What would be a second way of how we can do this?
Just being awareness, keeping aware of what's going on in our body, in our emotions. It's like our inner witness. It's to our true identity that's always trying to save us and not condemn us. I think it's so important to recognize what our body is doing in any given moment. Some of us are real attuned to that, and some of us really aren't. And when we're getting tension headaches and we're recognizing tenseness in our hands or our neck or our shoulders, or, some people get, I used to get reactions when I was nervous in the pit of my stomach, and it would affect, my intestines,
Yeah.
I mean, I would actually literally get a bodily reaction to anxiety I was feeling. And I know many people that are listening to us right now understand what that feels like. And so just becoming aware of what our body is doing and what our emotions, what kind of a level, did our emotions just go, through the roof? Did we just react with something that was completely really, just didn't fit the moment?
Yep.
And so looking at those things, increasing our own awareness of ourselves and allowing ourselves to step back and to be kind of witnesses of our own behavior, our own thoughts, being able to watch our thinking, as we'll talk about in another podcast.
Yeah, that's big. And I know another thing we both regularly do is seek to, in each moment of reality, have an awareness of what's most true, what God says is most true about us, that we are lavishly loved as we are, that we are abundantly supplied, fully provided for, and that we've got meaningful purpose for our lives. And that's true for every one of us. So those are ways of applying, living, loving, and leading from the source of your true identity.
Yeah. So where do you struggle or wrestle with accepting what is? What's been your experience in this? We'd love to hear from you and have you send us some of your questions or some of the situations that you find yourself in. And each week we'd like to answer a few of those here in our podcast.
And the way you can do that, either asking a question or making a comment on this episode, is go to our blog at youlivetrue.com, youlivetrue.com. Go to the show notes for this episode. It'll be right there on the main homepage, and you can scroll down to the comment section for this particular episode, and you can leave a comment there, a question, anything like that. So,
be great.
Just a couple of quick announcements. First of all, if this episode has been helpful to you, or you feel like this podcast has the potential to help others, then we would really appreciate your recommending this to your friends, family, whoever. One of the easiest ways to do this would be to go to our website and click on the show notes from today's episode and just hit the share button right there. And we better make sure that works.
We better make sure it works. You think it'll work,
yes.
Techie?
Yeah, it'll work.
Okay. Yeah. Well, in our next podcast, we're going to be talking about what's wrong with living strong, believing that we can be strong enough and hold it all together no matter what challenging or difficult circumstances happening in our lives may not always be the best thing for us. And we're going to talk about what we've learned about this and how we've come through a significant failure and the lessons that we gained from that.
Well, that's it for this episode of the Live True podcast. We want to invite you to, if you're not already subscribed to our blog that we write each week, you can go onto our website, subscribe to that. By the way, we got several bonuses that we're giving away along with that. Also, we invite you to subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already, so that it comes automatically to your computer, your tablet, or phone. We both subscribe to different kinds of podcasts we listen to all the time in the car and different parts of the day. If you want to listen from your computer, then just go over to the iTunes, hit iTunes, search for the subscribe right there, the Live True podcast. If you're doing this from your tablet or phone, just make sure you've downloaded the app from the Apple Store, simply called Podcast, a little purple icon, and then click to podcast, click on search, and then just type in the Live True podcast. And then all you have to do is hit the subscribe button right there, and automatically it'll show up in your podcast app whenever you want to access it 24 hours a day. Okay? If you'd like to read the summary of this podcast, you can go to our show notes on our website at youlivetrue.com. It can help you remember some of the primary things we were trying to get across today that can have take-home value for you.
It's been good to be with you today. So until next time, we want to encourage you to always live, love, and lead from the source of your true identity.